She's alive! Alive!
Reading through these posts reminded me of an odd experience I had with a woman in 6th grade. It was toward the end of fall, and my friend Garrett and I were walking home from school. Our route was about 2.5 miles long, but it was fairly scenic and took us straight home, so the distance wasn't really a problem. We were maybe 1/3 of the way home, minding our own business, talking shit about kids at school, when a female voice called after us. "Excuse me, boys," the stranger said. Originally, we thought it was someone from school who started walking our trail and just wanted to join our conversation. But we were greeted with a surprise when we turned around. It was a woman who looked to be in her mid-20s, lugging a large backpack. The lady looked to be nervous for some reason and looked sort of dirty, like she'd been wearing the same thing for a week. Thinking nothing of her saying hi, we said hi back as she catches up with us and starts to join our conversation. She was really kind, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary with her until she started asking us about how old we were, if we were from around here, and if we had any siblings. Starting to get defensive, Garrett and I start lying because telling this creep about personal things didn't seem smart. So we told her we were brothers and that we lived on the other side of town. Even though we looked nothing alike, she seemed to buy it and moved on with her conversation. "I've got something cool in my bag. Want to see it?" This really got the alarm bells ringing in my head. Stranger asking about my life, following us home, has something cool to show us? What doesn't seem wrong with that? "What is it?" Garrett asked her. "It's called a Singer button sewer," she replied. "Ever see one?" We told her we had not, and she asked if we could stop for a minute so she could get it out of her bag. "We really have to get home," I told her. "Our mom will be home soon." She assured us we wouldn't be late because she just wanted to show us her button sewer and then we could go. We were on a more secluded part of the trail home now. No cars passing by in a while. Giving us no time to decline her, she unslung her backpack, looked around the trail, and started opening it. "It's in here somewhere," she told us. Now, I don't believe in miracles, but the closest one I've ever had was Garrett's mom pulling up right then and there. "That's our mom," I told the lady in a hurry. She said something in reply, but we didn't wait to keep talking. We hopped in the car and left as fast as we could. The last I ever saw of that lady was her waving at us from the trail, with a look of anger and defeat on her face. I'm a senior in high school now, and still cannot figure out what I encountered 6 years ago. Did she really have a button sewer? Or was she pulling something else out of her bag? This story happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for it, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except for me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally had some rules, such as people traveling in groups of at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now, those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned, as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was extremely peaceful until I smelled cigarettes. It wasn't exactly the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts must have been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or a bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim at this point. Looking back on it, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late just hiking back to camp in the dark. It would be really dangerous even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods, looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back down, though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to do. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow, fade, then move slightly closer to the ground, as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other students who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor and the other students and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all the samples we were assigned, just to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading toward the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking, my professor having left the building in another direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness off of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late and having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I had smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is, until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off and sprinted toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run and saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and the dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my keycard in front of the door. As soon as I heard the soft beep, I opened the door, jumped through the doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two. Then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and the brim of a baseball cap before it disappears and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to my window overlooking the same yard I had just run through, there is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see that white paneled van again or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do. I'm still a newbie, so apologies if my format is off or anything. I was telling my husband about this sub one day, giving examples of the types of stories on here. Sarcastically, he says, "Oh, okay, like that one time you came outside and swear you didn't see me." I was so glad he brought that up, because I had forgotten all about it. So one day, he goes outside to smoke a cigarette. Definitely nothing new, because he is not allowed to smoke inside. We live in an apartment, and he usually lingers around the hallway entryway. I followed him out probably just to bug him, no particular reason. No more than about 5 to 10 seconds after he went outside. Once I'm outside, I don't see him in the entryway or walking down the sidewalk, so I look around the corner of the building to the left and the right. He is nowhere in sight. I actually asked myself out loud, where the fuck did he go so quickly? I went back inside. For some reason, I cannot recall my thought process at this point. I went right back outside. There he is, sitting on the steps. Like I said, we live in an apartment, and our door is the one immediately under the steps leading to the upstairs. You know how apartment steps usually look, concrete with gaps in between, so you can see people's legs very easily as they are walking down the steps. My point is, I would have seen him sitting on the steps, because I clearly did when I went out the second time. I asked him where he went so quickly, and he laughed at me and said, "I was wondering what you were doing." I didn't understand. He explained that he watched me walk out and peek around the corners and didn't understand why I was acting like I was looking for him. I, still not really understanding, explained to him that there is absolutely no way he was sitting on the steps. I would had to have walked by him twice the first time, once to peek around the corner, and once walking back to our door. He was absolutely not there, but he described me looking around the corners and swears I even looked right at him at one point. I thought he was playing a joke on me at first, but I seriously don't know where he could have gone anyway. He had no idea I would follow him outside to bug him, so he would not have known to hide in advance. To this day, he maintains that he was sitting right there the entire time. I wouldn't believe that if he didn't describe me looking around. I really wish I could remember what made me go right back outside the second time. Maybe the first time I walked outside to an eerily similar parallel universe. I was invited to go skiing up in Colorado with a close friend of mine in their friend's cabin up in the mountains. Obviously, I wanted to go. So during that spring break, we drove the almost 8-hour-long drive to Colorado. And as we were finally getting close to the cabin, it was already snowing heavily and rather dark outside. The cabin itself is about 1.5 miles away from the closest little village. Rather isolated. Something I am not used to at all. As we traveled farther into the mountains, simultaneously getting farther away from the city, I grew more on edge. Once we finally reached the cabin, it was well into the night, and the moment I stepped into the door, I did not like the feeling I got from the place. It felt as though the moment we turned on the lights, a bunch of people ran out the door, It felt occupied. Beside from that, the place was massive. It had 6 bedrooms and tons of open space. But as we were getting acquainted with the house, all I could think about was the feeling that someone was living there, or that at least there was a presence. Then as we were going upstairs, we found an amazing door, just a couple of feet in front of the last stair. The door looked as if someone had taken a tree out in the woods and made a massive door out of it. And on the right side was a large handle parallel to the door. Under the door was a towel near the crack at the bottom to keep the cold that was inside that room out of the rest of the house. But it already felt to me like it was keeping more than just the cold in that room. Despite this, the door and the room it was hiding immediately gave me very negative energy. Things such as the towel under the door seemed to contain more than just the cold in the room. Both my friend and I were afraid to even open the door. Eventually, curiosity set in, and I wandered into the room. The room inside was at least 30 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. Not just a physical cold either. It felt desolate, and the coldness penetrated through me. Not only was this room far colder than the other rooms, it looked completely different as well. All the other rooms were full of huge king-size beds with mountains of sheets. This one looked more like a 1950s married couple's room. There were 2 small beds parallel to each other in the room, with only 1 to 2 sheets. What scared me the most about this room, though, was there were 2 large crawl spaces on either side of the room. These freaked me out as they looked like tiny places for weird creatures to hide. To look inside these spaces, you had to pull out a flashlight as no light went into the spaces. Inside was nothing but some weird boxes in the middle of the passage, and I could see my friend with her flashlight on the other side. After we left the room, I was terrified, to be completely honest. Something about it shook me to my core, and I think my friend was just as scared. Even though there were 6 bedrooms in the house, we decided to sleep together in the only room besides the one from behind the bark door that had 2 beds. After the first day, things started to get better, even if I still felt a presence in the house. We went skiing, fishing, spent a lot of time playing ping pong. I liked playing ping pong, except it was near the back door, as sometimes when the ball fell near the door, both me and my friend would pick up the ball really quick, as if something was going to jump out of the room and grab us. One night, about 5 days into the trip, my friend's parents were going out for the night, so me and my friend were just playing ping pong late into the night. It was around midnight when I heard the first knock. The noise immediately sent chills down my back when I realized where it came from. It came from inside the bark door. Both me and my friend heard it as clear as day. We both looked at each other, hoping the other person didn't hear the sound. But we were disappointed. Simply typing this story at this point is giving me anxiety, but we decided to be rational and realize that something inside probably just fell. So we go and open the door. As soon as my friend opened the door, I ran to grab the light switch, which was much farther into the room than I would have liked. I crossed my eyes across the room, hoping, yet not hoping, to catch something in my view. I saw nothing, yet I felt as though I was playing hide and seek, and someone or something there was just hiding and waiting to be found. That's when I heard the second knock. It had come from the crawl space. Someone or something wanted us to find it. It had been knocked on so hard that I could see little reverberations still in the door. Utterly terrified, I opened the door as quick as I could and took a peek in with the flashlight on my phone, half expecting to find a morbid creature. Yet again, nothing. This creeped me out, but yet I found somewhat comforting, as I knew at this point we could simply be overreacting and eventually blow this off as a weird coincidence. I think that something realized this. As I was just closing the door and somewhat at peace, I heard a knock knock. Except this time, I did not just hear it. I felt it. I was still holding onto the door as it knocked one last time. We bolted out of the room and refused to go near it again, even though we had left the light on in the room. The rest of the weekend was purely us trying to forget what had just happened. This story has lived on with us, and as I mentioned earlier, it still gives me anxiety whenever I tell it. The feeling of that knock on my hand is an image that I will never be able to get out of my head. I will start this by saying I was absolutely stupid. But I was just starting college and wasn't too wise to the world then. I was preparing years ago to start my first semester of college. I was a few months away still, but wanted to get a head start on meeting friends that went there. I downloaded a few chats, social media apps. I was used to a few guys trying to flirt. But then there was this guy, a cute ex-Marine who was going to go to the school I was about to start at. I'll just call him C. We started talking and doing some innocent flirting. But then he really started creeping me out, so I started ignoring him. Months, maybe a year goes by, and no sign of C. One day I'm in the bookstore. I used to hang there between classes since I loved it. And I see a man that looks identical to C's picture. I didn't want to meet him, so I tried to camouflage myself and scurry over to the other side of the store. Suddenly he comes right into the aisle I'm in, and he's staring right at me. I knew immediately he recognized me. Great. He started with small talk, and then this girl comes by and starts talking his ear off. I think this is my chance to get away, but he tells me to stay. Keep in mind, I'm a small girl at 100 pounds, 5'3", and this very intimidating man is freaking me out, so I listened. She left us after a bit, and he started asking me when we were going to hook up. I told him I really needed to pay for my stuff and go to class. Begrudgingly, he walked out. I watched him. I thought the coast was clear. I paid for my stuff and went out the other exit that connects to a different building and sat on a couch before making the long walk to class. Next thing I know, he comes and sits right next to me, scooting closer as he speaks. He tells me how I've been a tease for not having sex with him, and he's practically touching me now. I told him how I never intended to have sex with him, and all the while hoping someone would hear what was going on. But they didn't. So I grabbed my bags in case I needed to run. It's at this point when shit got really scary for me. C stands up and is literally an inch from my face. He says, "You know, I could just lift up my shorts and show you my cock, and no one would see it or believe you." And that's when he actually did it. I was terrified and now trapped. I think he saw my fear and was amused, so he laughed and took a step back. I saw an opportunity and ran. I saw him twice more over the years, but thankfully he didn't see me. I know I should have reported it to the university police, but I had no proof. And his words about people not believing me took over my mind for the longest time. It was almost 20 years ago now since this happened, so I'm pretty sure no one is in imminent danger. My family has some property that backs up to Carson National Forest in New Mexico. It's been in the family for years, and my sister and I both spend our summers up there. It's gorgeous. Well, it is for people who lived out in far west Texas. Nice and green, cool mountain air in the summer. It was always a relief to get up there and away from the dusty ranch. My dad was ex-military and having 2 daughters. Let's just say we did lots of outdoor stuff. He taught us survival skills and how to defend ourselves. We hunted and fished and did lots of camping and hiking. To us, it was always a fun time, but I guess he felt the need to pass his skills on to us. We spent several weeks in the summer up there hiking with him and exploring the old cabins, mining communities, and checking the big ditch project that was built for Red River back in the late 1800s. At least I think that's the correct date for that project, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it's a great place to hike with some beautiful high mountain lakes, streams, lots of wildlife, etc. Now this happened when I was in college and my younger sister was still in high school. My dad was still at home having to work and would come up every few weeks to spend time with us. We were up there with our mom and she mainly spent time in town or around the property painting. We spent our time on the Jeep trails or hiking and sleeping. It was late June, maybe early July, I think, and we had decided we were going to hike up to Lost Lake. It's one of my favorite lakes up there because if you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like a heart. We set off in the morning, and we were prepared. We both had a small pack, water, snacks, and we both had a small hammock we planned to set up once we got to the lake, so we could just enjoy the area for a while. I will admit to being an outdoor type and swear when it's quiet enough, you can hear the trees talk. We also both always carried a knife when we hiked. My dad always insisted we have something just in case an accident happened or we just needed it. The hike was going good since the summer cabin is pretty far up the valley. We just set out on foot to the trailhead. To get to Lost Lake, you take another trail that goes up to Middle Fork Lake. Then you break off that trail for Lost Lake. We run into a few other hikers, but they're going to Middle Fork Lake. And we were pleased because it looked like we could possibly have Lost Lake all to ourselves. It's a pretty good hike with some long switchbacks, but totally worth it because the lake is just beautiful and a very pretty emerald green in color. We got there and saw that we did have the lake to ourselves. We hiked around the lake and decided to hike back a bit to find a good spot to set up our hammocks. We walked into the tree line and the first thing my sister said was, "Do you smell that?" And yes, I did. It was a dead animal with a strong scent of blood. We had both done lots of hunting and knew that smell, and that's when I saw it. It was a deer carcass, but what was around it was what disgusted me. Placed around the deer carcass in a circle were its organ, entrails, etc. But it wasn't like it was being cleaned. It's like they were placed in a certain arrangement, with little piles of rocks in between everything. Now I know how some people get disgusting with their kills, and I have had some guys try to gross me out, but I don't fall for crap like that. This made me uneasy. It wasn't just being cleaned. It was like it was set up in a certain meaning, or it had meaning. I stepped back from this weird circle, and then my sister starts to say my name but stops, because then we see the guy who had done this. And he looks like he just climbed out from inside the deer because he is covered in blood and doesn't have much clothing on. At first I thought he didn't have anything on, but honestly, I didn't try to check him out much. He was standing back away from his gruesome little circle, just standing close to a group of trees that were pretty close together. He was maybe 20 feet from us. I think maybe he was trying to hide. Not for sure, but my dad had always taught us that if we ever found ourselves in a situation where we didn't feel in control, to do everything in our power to try to take control on the situation. Do something that is going to take the other person by surprise. Don't do what they expect you to do. So this was raging through my brain. And I could also tell my sister was about to freak the fuck out, so I stepped up and said, "Hey, pretty good kill you got there. Did you use a bow?" The guy just stood there, his eyes all crazy wide, like he was stoked out of his brain on planet Pluto. So I'm thinking, great. We ran into a guy getting his hunt on, and he lost it and was getting blood crazy with his deer. He was staring me down, and I was staring right back, and my sister was getting ready to run. I still don't know what came over me, but I then put my hand on my knife that I kept on my waist just to show him that I wasn't completely helpless. I don't know why I did it, but something told me to let him know that I wasn't going to back down or be afraid. I kept eye contact with him, and I would guess he was maybe in his early 30s. But I'm bad at guessing people's ages. He was pretty dirty though. You could tell that even with all the blood he had everywhere. I start to back off, and my sister had moved behind me, so I spoke again and said, "So, you have a great hunting day?" Again, the crazy didn't say a thing, just stood there like he was a statue or something, or like he thought I couldn't see him if he didn't move or make any sound. We moved back to the lakeside again and booked it around the lake. My sister stayed up front, as she was shaking pretty bad. I was mainly pissed off at first because if he wanted to get all crazy in the woods with his deer, then he should have gone further back up in the forest. We get back to the trailhead and stopped to get our bearing and looked at each other. I was scanning the forest line to make sure we weren't being followed, and my sister was just in shock. We started down the trail pretty fast, and I was hoping I could keep my sister together until we could at least reach the Middle Fork Lake Trail, or that we could even run into some more hikers. But the odds weren't good on this particular trail because you have to get an early start on Lost Lake Trail, and by now, it's late morning, almost noon. We were making good time and hadn't discussed what we saw, just started hiking back down. I started to get that feeling when you know you are not alone. I kept checking, but I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything at first either. My sister refused to look back and just kept going, but I felt that I had to keep checking to make sure the idiot wasn't following us. That's when the first stuff came flying at us. It was some small pebbles, but it really pissed me off because it was obvious someone was throwing them at us, and it could only have been him. My sister was almost running at this point, but I'm a mouthy smartass, and damn it, this was my forest. I had grown up here. These were my lakes, my trails, and I wasn't about to let some crazy dude ruin it for me. I started yelling back that he needed to go back to his deer and leave us alone. At this point, my sister is telling me to shut up and just come on. And I'm thinking, no way. This guy is just trying to scare us. The pebbles stopped. And then we started hearing barking and growling noises. My sister said, "Now he's growling at us?" and I just told her to get on down the trail and ignore it. He was behind us pretty much the entire way, growling and making these barking noises every once in a while, but I never caught a glimpse of him. Once we got close to where the trail joined in with Middle Fork Trail, he seemed to back off. I never caught sight of him behind us, but I could hear him and I just knew he was there. We started down the rest of the trail. My sister refused to stop or look behind her, so I kept checking every so often. Didn't see anything or hear anything. We started to discuss what had happened, and she felt like he was very sinister and felt like we had been in a dangerous situation. I felt like he was just getting his kicks out of scaring two girls. I mean, he had to have heard us coming around the lake. We weren't being quiet. It was the opposite, because there are black bears up there and we would always be pretty loud while hiking, hoping to scare off any bear in the area so we wouldn't come up on one. We told our parents, and my dad didn't like what he heard. He did teach us some more up-close defense skills after that day, and forbid us from ever hiking alone or just the two of us again. We didn't hike up that trail for several years with anyone. It freaked my sister out, and I just didn't like remembering a time when I was scared in the forest that I considered my own. I didn't know it at the time, but after we had gotten back to the house and told my mom, she had called some neighbors, and a few of the men hiked up there the next day to check things out. They did find the deer carcass and some empty hiking packs. They also found a rustic campsite further back in the woods that had been cleared out as well.